Hey, thank you very much for your kind applause. Yeah, I got to tell you, man, all you guys showing up this morning is like, it's like that first cup of coffee in the morning, you know? It's a smack in the face. It's good. Come on, let's hear it! Yeah! So, first of all, I want to thank my guitar manufacturer, Jackson. They have built the best guitars on the planet, including what I feel mine represents. And secondly, I want to thank Thad, of course, and everybody at Sweetwater, right? They bring you guys, the cool thing is they bring you all the gear that makes you broke, but they do it with a lot of customer service and a lot of heart. So even though your wallet's empty, you feel good, right? And finally, I want to thank you guys for coming out, just enjoying music, having a good time today. And yeah, I think that's about it for my initial announcement. You guys want to hear me play a song? All right. Here we go. This is a song off of my band, Act of Defiance's new CD, Old Scars, New Wounds. This song is called Misinformation Age. That's one way to warm up in the morning, I'll tell you. Hey, thanks again for being out here. I wanted to tell you, normally when I do a clinic, you know, it's just kind of a little bit more loose. I'll play some songs, ask some questions. We'll definitely have plenty of that. I don't see a mic out there for you guys, but I'm definitely going to ask you some questions anyways because I want to hear from you. But I did come up with a couple of general topics that I wanted to talk about today overall. The first being practice perspectives and practice tips and how to manage your practice time and just things that I've learned over the course of, you know, my 30 to almost 40 years now playing. I'm old. At any rate, the second half is how I tend to like to use theory and my knowledge of theory to not only advance my playing, but also to come up with, you know, what I feel are cool riffs. And so I wanted to share a little bit of that with you guys as well today. The first question I have for you guys, this is actually your clinic today. How many of you guys play guitar? Oh, man. How many of you guys are musician police, like going like this right now? All right. There he is. There's the musician police. So, and how many of you play an instrument in general? Yep. It's a pretty good portion of the crowd. You know, even though I'm up here on stage, I feel extremely fortunate to be here because I believe personally my personality style wasn't necessarily meant for live performance. Very type A, want everything to be exact and perfect. And when I first started playing the guitar, I loved the guitar, and I got into all the shredders, you know, Yngwie, Paul Gilbert, Jason Becker, all the great shredders, and I just couldn't believe how awesome they were. And I remember when I first started playing, I read this article, and it was by one of them, and it said, reach for the stars, and you'll always be ahead of everybody else. And I was like, wow, yeah, I'm going to reach for the stars, you know. And then you read inspirational things like, you know, try harder and, you know, put in more time and duty over, you know, being lazy. And, you know, we've all heard these things. And how many of you think those all sound like great memes, or not memes, but adages for you to live by, right? They sound awesome, right? Well, I think they were actually pretty detrimental to me because what they did was they really did make me try and play, like try real hard on the guitar. And it really, once you do that in the practice room and you ingrain that kind of stress in the practice room, if your technique's not ready for it, imagine what happens to your playing once you get on stage, right? So for some of you, you may never even know, like, what it's like. You might just pick up the guitar, you can sit in front of people, you can play real relaxed and easy. Some of you are in the middle, some of you are maybe at extremes with that. But I'm here to tell you that any bit of stress that you can shed from your playing will benefit you greatly. So the first thing that I want you to do is try and acknowledge things positive in your practice daily. Everything that you feel like you accomplished. So have you guys ever heard of a term called negative bias confirmation? Do you guys know what that is? So that's a tendency that most people have to basically bag on themselves. For every one thing that you think goes well, you say 3 negative things on average. And in performance, in music performance, you can't be getting up on stage or performing for people with that kind of an attitude. You gotta be comfortable with what your playing is and you know, and feel good about it. So I want you guys, when you get in the practice room, to make sure, first of all, as you're working on things, that you acknowledge good things that happen all the time. So as much as you can, because that negative bias confirmation is always there. I want you to look at guitar practice as not, you know, this random thing that you just pick up and noodle, or that you, even if you're, you know, maybe a little bit more steeped in technique and stuff like that, where you just randomly repeat for hours and hours the same riff, just hoping it gets better. I want you to see your practice as this kind of puzzle to figure out. you know, where you're investigating things. You're looking at potential solutions, and if you're not finding one, look at another way to potentially solve those issues within the practice room. Because once you do that, then it'll be much more likely to occur on stage, right? So those are my mental practice tips. Now I've got a few different ways that I would recommend practicing to help that out. The first one, obviously, is slow programming. How many of you guys have heard, oh, you got to slow it down? Right, it's like, it is a no-brainer, but it is really effective in one thing. As long as you're paying attention when you're playing slow, you're really thinking about how you're programming the strings. So for example, the first riff that I played in MIA, the first fast one, was this kind of... this kind of string skipping thing, right? So slow programming for me really means, okay, you know, that programming of how far to move the hand, and you know, obviously slow would be. Right? And so you do that not just to say, oh, I got to repeat it like 3 times slow. I want to observe what the hand needs to do to facilitate the riff, right? So don't just do it unconsciously. Try and at least do 3 repetitions where you're really observing how your hand moves and how it wants to function. That's a really effective way to use slow programming. The next one, have you guys ever heard of a simple practice technique called fragmenting? Anybody? Yeah. I see a few of you. This is one of my favorites for starting to build in speed. So where you do slow programming, fragmenting, you can kick up the tempo, but you're doing it in smaller chunks. So for this particular riff, I broke it up by string. So I went... One more time. Right, that's one way to fragment, and I recommend that all the time. And slowly you can join the two, slow practice as well as fragmented practice. And one thing I want to mention about fragmented practice is that you can do it in so many different ways. So I've taken this riff, I fragmented it by string, I fragmented it into sixteenths, I fragmented it into the 10/3 that it is in the actual song, which is really weird. The actual riff kind of floats over the beat. And you can, it's all in the name of finding solutions, right? So I highly advocate those. The next one I would recommend is tempo modulation. Tempo modulation I use when I'm having trouble with tricky shifts and stuff like that. The second solo in Misinformation Age has this... and then it goes... And I've always... like getting that transition from... getting into that was always an issue for me. So one thing I would do is I would play this up to tempo. And then... and then just intentionally slow that down. And the main thing with that for me is keeping the stress out. You know, just not ingraining that try that I've talked about in the beginning that oddly enough I kind of think is a bad thing. I'm not telling you guys to be lazy or anything. Don't be lazy. I'm telling you the guitar should be easy, and I want you to relax when you practice it. I want you to have fun and investigate it, not feel like you've got to crush some riff or something like that, right? So tempo modulation, another very effective tool. And then finally, for like little warm-ups and stuff like that, I highly recommend double time tempo switching. So that'd be where if you did something like you know, and so on and so forth. And to me, that really does a really good job of slowly, it's kind of like the mix of slow programming and then fragmenting, where you're looking at your playing slow, and then you actually get the opportunity to play it fast. And you can vary the amounts of, you know, slow to fast repetitions. So that was 2 beats of eighth, 4 beats of eighth notes and 2 beats of sixteenths. You could make it 4 and 4. So you could go, and then, and so on and so forth. And you can increase the length of time if endurance is any sort of an issue for you guys. The last thing I want to mention is combinations. Remember that you're looking for solutions to your playing, right? You want to have fun with it, but at the same time, you do want to solve the problems. And, you know, oftentimes, I think a lot of people just, with this style of playing, just go, oh, I got to play faster. But it really comes down to fundamental technique issues that keeps you from playing fast. So I would say worry about the other stuff first, the dynamic evenness. You know how I was playing with a clean tone right there? That, to me, is the best way to practice for dynamic evenness. And then, of course, with distortion, that's the best way to practice when you really need to know how to control the strings. So, with that being said, you guys want me to play another tune? All right. This one's called Overexposure. It's also from Old Scars, New Wounds. Thank you so much, guys. Hey, give me 1 second. I'm gonna take off this jacket. It's actually getting hot up here. Hang on. That's better. I was starting to get really hot there. At any rate, thanks again for that. That was overexposure. Now I wanted to ask you guys. Do you guys have any particular questions about practicing so far in this particular section of the clinic? Any questions? One right there. You're going to have to yell real loud, but... Depends on what you want to... So he's asking, what do you consider the bare minimum time that you want to be in the practice room a day? And my answer is it depends on what you want to accomplish. So if I were getting ready to audition for college or, some competition or something like that, I would say the bare minimum... Well, I'm a little overzealous with practice time, but I would say 5 hours. Like, for getting ready for a competition or something like that. Does that answer your question, or do you have a more specific goal? No, nothing to? All right. He's got one right there in the Eagles shirt. I tend to practice a fairly decent amount. When I've got no other obligations during the day, I'll probably get in 6+ hours. Yeah, so... But it used to be crazy, how I gave that whole spiel about, trying harder and all of that. There was a time when I was in high school where I told myself, this was like a summer, and I told myself, I've got to get up, I've got to practice 2 hours on the piano, 2 hours on the violin, 5 hours on the classical, and 5 hours on the electric. And it was insane. It was like, literally, I almost look back on that now and feel like it was practicing for practicing's sake and not really improving on the instrument, you know what I mean? So, the main thing is that you have fun with the guitar. And if you have obligations, try and have fun accomplishing those obligations. Now when I practice 6 hours a day, it's not because I'm telling myself, you gotta try, you gotta work harder. It's because I'm like, I want to work on this now. I want to check that out, those kinds of things, right? I saw a question right there. Can you say that a little bit louder? It's a good question. I don't know if I can answer it because I've always kind of done that. I've always ridden the line. So he's asking, if I practice a different type of technique other than picking, does it affect my picking? Well, it will take away time that you could be working on your picking. However, I've always done that. I've always worked on my classical playing. I've always worked on two-handed tapping and stuff like that. Though, I would say picking still takes up the bulk of my time. One book that I recommend everybody reads is a book called The Inner Game of Tennis. One thing that it mentions on this topic is sometimes when tennis players were, like, let's say somebody was working really hard on their serve, and they were pulled out of that to work on their backhand or something like that, or in a doubles team or something. They found that when they came back 6 months later, that their serve was even better. So I think exposing yourself to a variety of techniques and things can actually benefit the initial technique that you're hoping to serve. So, yeah, right there. As far as legato goes, well, I think the typical, for me, it's going to be the just slurring scales. Right? And you can take any pattern. And work on those various different patterns. I wouldn't consider myself an extreme legato player. I do put legato playing in my songs and stuff like that. But I'm not like, I'm not like the legato guy. I'm not Alan Holdsworth, who is awesome, by the way. But I like to do that, and I also like to. So I'll put it in arpeggios as well. And put in a nice little dominant in that dominant chord or a number of other chords. So I'll use slurring in that sense, but I would recommend just running through your scales, slurring. You could even do work on your sequences of fourths with slurring and all kinds of any riff you could do picking. I would recommend that you do slurring if you're really into that idea. Yeah, right there. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't necessarily consider myself a chicken picker. However, there are some riffs that I'm doing, and the main thing that helped me was my classical guitar training, right? So, for example, in the first song I played, there's this riff, and it goes. And for me, like, the one thing I really like to do is open up my hand. So obviously I have what I call my pick clip on my thumb, and that opens up my hand so I can use all my A, M, and I finger to also chicken pick as well, if that makes sense. But there are a lot of riffs you can do. Like, do you hold a traditional pick? Yeah, so I would recommend, like, and you're into, like, shreddy kind of playing? So I would do a string skipping kind of Gilbert riff. Like, I would do something that starts on F sharp on the third string, so 11, 12, 14. And then I would just pull out the middle finger. I don't really work on that, so I'll do it. Something like that, right? And then, you could always do more traditional. Stuff like that, where you're just alternating back and forth, doing traditional country riffs, things that that I don't practice that much, but I would think they would be great for chicken picking. So, yeah. Let me get one more way back there. You're gonna have to shout. What's funny? I try and be really consistent no matter what, almost to a fault, because sometimes it really cuts into the day. Like where I'm scrambling to try and get my practice time in when I really should be worrying about the logistics of a show or something like that. So traditionally, when I'm on tour, I first thing I typically do is get up, play a little bit of guitar, go work out, come back, play guitar, do sound check, play guitar, show. Kind of a thing. But, things happen in everybody's life, right, where you don't get the kind of practice you want, and you just have to accept it. So, yeah. Let me do one last question, then I'll play some more for you guys, all right? Right up front. Yeah, I definitely have reached walls in my practicing, and that is actually pretty much the premise of what the practicing side of this is all about, because I felt like I reached a lot of walls with my picking in terms of its ability, my ability to just simply play fast and play articulately, and I feel like recently, because I've really adopted a new way of thinking about my practice, that it's really helped hit that next wall. Again, I want you to make sure that you're looking at the right criteria when you're practicing. So don't have the external. Try and get rid of your ego. Accept where you're at, and say, all right, I'm playing this pretty well, but I know I could play it better. What are the solutions? Again, to me, that's what's really helped, especially recently. So just keep thinking about if you're playing something over and over again and it's not getting better, try and find a different way to play it. Put on the metronome and put it in a different phrasing. So instead of 16th notes, maybe you would play it in 6 tuplets or something like that. Okay? Yeah. All right. I think I'll play a song for you called Rise of Rebellion. This is, again, off Old Scars, New Wounds. Thank you. You guys like that one? Yeah. I'm not seeing the mosh pit yet, though. That's the only problem. What? Oh, well, you can throw that. No, I'm just kidding. Don't throw your chairs, all right? As long as you don't associate it in any way, shape, or form with anything I recommended. All right? At any rate, the second half of my clinic performance was a little bit more about theory and the way I'm a huge advocate of theory. And I love it because I finally see a day where I feel like what people talk about when they say, oh, I'm a fill player, and you get the other people's side of the camp saying, oh, you know, I'm technique, where for me, they're coming together. And I'll tell you where I see that spot going, and I'm not there yet, but one day I will be, is where when my mind imagines something that I'm feeling and something that's musical to me, I can then classify it theoretically and instantly know exactly what I want to do on the instrument. You know, it would be great to be able to hear something in your head and say, oh, you know, well, that's an E flat major sharp 7 to, E flat major sharp 11 to B flat dominant to, you know, an A flat major or something like that, just instantly in your head, and then be able to play it, and that's what you wanted to hear. And, you know, I'm sure that there are people that can do that, and I envy them to no end. But for me right now, I get ideas in my head. I get, you know, so for example, the last song I played had this tricky little, speaking of chicken picking, right? And for me, that was, I started coming up with that riff, and what I wanted to hear in my head was, and I was like, oh yeah, intervallic and accenting on the high string. And then I go into this section. The song is actually in triplets. And now I go into the section where I'm phrasing fours, but in the time of triplets. This in the classical world is known as a hemiola. So if you're going right? So that's in essence what a hemiola is. And it's so funny, when I started working on that, Shawn, my drummer in Active Defiance, he was actually recording the drums at that time. You know, he was just going to play it straight through, you know, just regular old fill, because I hadn't written the solo. He hadn't heard the solo yet. And I wrote that part, and instantly I'm on the phone trying to get a hold of Shawn in the studio. I'm like, dude, measure 72 at 72 for 2 bars. Can you please phrase 16th notes like this? And so I was describing it, and literally we put that together without ever hearing each other's part because of theory, right? Otherwise, in my mind, it would have been a huge opportunity missed. You know, that kind of magic that happens when you hear players play together, it doesn't happen as much these days because of the separateness with which that we can record now. And while I miss it, you know, I think if you're conscious enough about what you're doing and what you want other players to do, then you can make it happen in another way. So you got to be more knowledgeable, I think, when going into recording these days. You know, more on top of it. At least in my mind. I mean, you know, I always heard the stories of people showing up drunk and recording the best tunes of their life and just like, you know, partying the night before. I could never do that. I wish I could, because that shows a kind of freedom that I don't have yet. But at any rate, so again, really an advocate of theory. And I wanted to show you guys another riff that I'll play here in a moment. Actually, I'll play you the riff first, okay? I'm gonna play a song called Reborn, and just listen for the end riff, and then I'll go over it after this, okay? What's that? Yes. Yes, just mild mosh. You know, tap the guy a little bit next to you and warm it up, you know what I mean? See how your neighbor's feeling about it. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. That's a song called Reborn. So I wanted to talk about the end of that solo, because what I heard when I was thinking about ending the last phrase was this kind of cascading set of arpeggios that they didn't have the same phrasing as the rhythm behind them. They had their own chord progression going on. And real quick tip, that's one thing I really like to do as far as when you get rhythms in metal, a lot of times, sometimes they're static. They want to stay on E or they want to stay on A, and they don't really move a lot. And I want you guys to feel the freedom to try and invent your own chord progression over the top of that. If you feel like, you know, how many of you guitarists out there in thrash metal bands? Right there, over there? You guys write solos? He writes solos, yeah. Have you ever run into like kind of a rhythm that, you know, harmonically just stays on that E or stays on a particular note? Yeah, and so for me, like, I used to always go like, well, I'm stuck. I can't do anything else. But I was wrong. You can definitely do something else. And you can make it the most prominent thing. And that's what a lead should be. If you're going to be a lead player, then the rhythm should support you in a way, right? So take it by the horns, make it your own. You can impose your own chord progressions over the top, your own tonalities. If you know it's in the key of E and he's mainly chugging on an E and a B, you know, you could put a harmonic minor, a Hungarian gypsy minor over the top of it. All these cool tonalities that I love and hopefully you guys love too. And make it your own. So, at any rate, when I was listening to that end, I knew I wanted this kind of cascading sequence of fourths kind of thing happening, which was, let me see if I can tap that E. Right? So it's got that nice cascading sequence of fourths idea going on it. And so, and for me, so obviously the rhythm is in E. I started on an E minor because I think you got to give your audience familiar ground to start with. You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to put a G minor over the top of this E and expect people to be like, oh, that sounds good, you know. You got to be a little cautious with what you do, but you can try and impose a lot more than I think most people would realize. So I start with the E, and then I went to A minor. And then I went to a good old D sharp whole diminished because it almost wouldn't be metal without diminished. And that end part actually to me is quite interesting too because I really tried to bring out different tonalities. So that first arpeggio is actually a C minor with a flat 5. And where I pulled that from, now I hope I don't lose you guys on this, but I pulled that from E harmonic minor. And if you see C minor has a E flat as the third. But you could also spell that as a D sharp, which is what's in E harmonic minor. So I thought to myself, well, I'm going to put a C minor over this E minor, and I'm going to imply some more of that harmonic minor kind of tone. And then not only that, but I use the F sharp in E minor to add a flat 5 to that. So it's... And then back to the whole diminished because it's metal. So, you know, a lot of times my inspiration for theory can be just a rhythmic idea, diga-da, diga-da, diga-diga, diga, or it can be a tonality that I want to hear over the top, or a melody, of course, right? That initial finger-picking riff in MIA, to me, is hugely inspired by counterpoint, Bach, Scarlatti, Vivaldi, because what I like to do is I like to hear contrary motion in a single line. So when you hear that upper line descends, while the lower line actually ascends. So we get that contrary motion that's created in that. And then, of course, the sliding, as soon as I slid to that first note, I'm like, this has to be the motive of the upper voice in that. So we get... One more time. So I love contrary motion. I love giving the impression of independent voices within a single line. And if you've ever heard like a violin partita or anything like that, you know that Bach was the master. Like he is so insanely good at doing that kind of stuff. And you know, I aspire. At any rate, so that's my spiel on theory. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah, another one for you right there. So he's saying, you know, when you use this kind of technique, how do you keep your solos from just sounding like a bunch of licks and scales and stuff? And some of you might argue that I don't, you know. And in a way, I would agree with you. I love the sound of ascending scales, descending scales. To me, they make a statement by where they lead, you know. So to me, they function very well. But I would say it's been a long road for me to get to where I'm at, of course. But I think you could fast track it if you made it a point to want to, like when you're thinking about writing a solo, trying to imagine where you want it to go first. And that will bring out all the musicality you need. And then your technique will serve that idea. Instead of saying, oh, now I'm going to run this scale, and then I should probably do, you know, this, you know, this riff, and then I'm going to do whatever. To me, that sounds very plodding, and it's very disconnected from the music, right? So that's what I would recommend. Try and use your imagination, even if it's just a rhythmic idea. Once you start playing around with a rhythmic idea, like it really will fall into place, I think, pretty quickly. So, yeah, right there. Yes. Wait, say that second half again. It's hugely important, but I will. So I am a metronome like advocate, like you wouldn't believe. Like a lot of times when you hear me practicing, all you constantly hear is deep, 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 deep. You know, and but I would tell you, I want you to be careful with the metronome. This is something I've only recently, within the last 2 weeks, started to realize. There is a psychology behind the metronome, and I want to make sure you guys use it the correct way, which I always use the metronome to push me. Oh, I'm going to be able to play at 220 16th notes. You know, like trying as hard as I can to make it come out. And, you know, that is the wrong way to practice. That's ingraining stress. It's ingraining all these wrong muscle groups. And, you know, one day, this is a long time ago now, but this is kind of part of what led to my current thought process. I was sitting there trying to pick through this scale riff, you know, and I noticed that my guitar was doing this. And I'm like, well, it should not take this much effort. It should not be that hard. And so with the metronome, what I want you to do, I want you to start by using it to slow you down. You know, and really feel the rhythm, right? Whatever it is, whether it's 16th sextuplets or 9/2 or whatever, you know, you decide to subdivide into. And then once you feel really comfortable with the riff, then I want you to kind of lead the beat a little bit. Like, oh, I got this, you know, I'm playing ahead of the metronome a little bit now. Because that's a positive affirmation about your ability and not one where, oh, can I make it, you know? So that would be my recommendation for the metronome. I would also recommend recently, the last few weeks, I've been warming up way without a metronome. Like I used to turn a metronome on right away. Okay, I got to get oriented with the beat, you know. And now it's like I got to get oriented with my technique. I got to get comfortable with how I'm playing and how I'm picking. And then I'll start to look at the metronome. So that's what I would recommend on that one. Yeah. I'll get to you as well. But the Eagles guy was faster, man. I'm sorry. He was like. So. Yep. Yeah, that was initially an exercise. So he's talking about the. that particular piece, I don't know how many of you have seen me do it. Let me turn on some distortion. I'm going to try it. Let's see how it goes. Wow. I can't believe it came out that good. So he's talking about that technique. And what was your question? Eagles. Absolutely, yes. So I'm sorry. Yeah, I started to answer a question and then I got sidetracked. But so he's asking if there was any theory involved with that. And absolutely, that particular piece was initially just an exercise for me to develop the concept of alternating hands through an arpeggio. And this particular concept was actually from my piano playing, because there was one thing I loved to do was to roll octaves over the top of each other, and so I was like, oh, maybe you could do this on guitar, And so I thought about doing just this. I actually called out the chord progression. I made it a study. I said, I'm going to do a 6-5-1 in B minor because I know I like, in E minor, because I know I like 6-5-1 chord progressions, and so this, in a way, I don't consider this the most musical representation, but it was a study. It was something for me to build on and to learn how to do. So I started with a C in the lowest octave you could, and then octave, 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 C major. And then I go to a B major, which is your dominant 5 chord. And then, of course, our 1 chord twice, E minor. And that's literally, I laid out a program for it before I ever played it, and it was an exercise. So theory was huge in that one, almost a little lopsided on that. Yeah. Any last questions? Right over there. Absolutely. But and this is where I think metal really is kind of really unique, because you can sneak those. If you listen to like Revocation, right? He's great at sneaking in cool tonalities, and Dan's awesome, and so many other bands as well. But yeah, you can sneak in obviously classical music, jazz. Candaria, if you've ever heard of that band, is huge, like mix of metal and jazz. But just all, there's flamenco and metal. I've got a flamenco metal tune that I'll be releasing sometime. But so I sneak it in all the time. But the one thing I want you to remember is don't shoehorn it in there. Make it something that is a part of the song, wants to be a part of the song, right? So I would, and if you if you have a technique developed on a different style, start by writing with that technique, and then see how the song develops around it. And that's what I would recommend most of all. So, yeah, one more. The Mosher. What's up? What techniques? So the first thing I would recommend, I love sweep picking. I know it's kind of like, with some people it's kind of taboo because it's done a lot. But I want people to realize that it's only a technique. It's an ability to play an arpeggio, which an arpeggio within our current tonal system is pretty functional, pretty usable, you know what I mean? And so when I think of sweeping, I don't think of the technique so much as I think of making sure that I get rhythm in my playing. So if I'm doing 6 tuplets, so it's always got tick-a-da-tick-a-da-tick-a-da-tick-a-da-da. It's not just, It's not like a rake or some musical device. It's actual, has its own rhythm. You know, it has its own direction and its own sense of melody. Let me play a real quick excerpt for you with some sweep stuff in it. Thank you. So that's got a few different mixes of some tempos. The first half is 16ths. Right? And then the second half kind of slows down. It's funny how when you go to play it slow, it's like, wait, what do I do? So it runs through triplets. And to me, that's the biggest component of turning arpeggios into melodies, right? If you hear the top voice, right? So then you get a sense of melody from the arpeggio itself. So always keep rhythm in your sweep practice. All right? All right. Let me see here real quick. I'm going to play one more thing for you guys. You guys ready to hear one more thing? 5. All right, cool. All right. This song is actually off of our first CD, Birth and the Burial. This song is called Throwback. This is, well, don't mosh. I was just kidding earlier. But if there were a song to mosh to, this would be it. Hey, thank you guys so much for coming to hang out with me and here at Sweetwater's Gear Fest this year. It looks like it's awesome. And thanks to Jackson and everybody else. Right on, guys. Have a good time today, all right?